Chapter 1, The Archive of Dr. Crane. Commander Data did not intend to become a fan. It began, as most of his fascinations did, with a file folder. The Enterprise carried libraries within libraries, astronomical charts, xenobiology catalogs, diplomatic records, and an ever-expanding collection of cultural artifacts that various departments insisted were mission-critical. Data had always treated that last category with particular care. Human culture, he had learned, was often archived in forms that looked frivolous while disguising the mechanisms by which humans soothed themselves, sharpened their social instincts, and concealed their despair. When Lieutenant Barclay had once described comfort viewing, Data had dutifully attempted to quantify the term. He had found a subdirectory labeled Historic Researches, Earth Entertainment, Television, Sitcoms. The pluralization of researches suggested the folder had been named by a committee. Inside it, a title appeared with a simple annotation, Frasier, Seattle, late 20th century, psychiatrist, radio, family. Data opened the first episode. Within 8 minutes, he paused playback and ran 3 separate diagnostic checks on his internal processors. The dialogue contained layered meanings. The character statements were frequently inconsistent with their apparent intentions. Reactions occurred that were not logically proportionate to the stimuli that preceded them, yet the audience response recorded as a pattern of laughter was precise and reliable. By the end of the episode, Data had made a note. Humor appears to be a controlled violation of expectation, moderated by social permission. By the end of the first season, he had made another note. Frasier Crane and Niles Crane demonstrate an unusually high density of self-referential performance. Potential study, identity as conversation. By the time Commander Riker found Data in 10 Forward at 0300 hours, holding a mug of herbal tea he did not drink while watching a 2-century-old sitcom with a focus usually reserved for stellar cartography, Data had made a third note. I would like to speak with them. Riker had stared at the screen where 2 impeccably dressed men argued about Sherry, then looked back at Data. You can't. Not physically, Data agreed. However, I can simulate. Riker had waved one hand as if batting away a moth of dubious wisdom. As long as you don't program them to sing. Data had considered this. The program includes no musical numbers. Riker's relief was visible. Then have fun. Data did. He used the holodeck's architectural templates and historical Seattle blueprints. He replicated the interior design of an apartment with an almost reverent attention to the angle of every chair. He calibrated lighting so that late afternoon sun would catch on polished wood and glass, because the show's emotional temperature seemed to rely on warm surfaces that promised comfort but threatened reflections. Then he paused, fingers hovering above the final command. The holodeck could generate people. It could generate perfect copies, voices, gestures, microexpressions, so accurate that even a trained observer might forget, temporarily, that they were looking at photons and force fields. Data did not forget. He rarely forgot anything. But he had begun to suspect that forgetting, briefly, was part of the point. Computer, he said, initialize program, Frasier apt cafe KACL, character fidelity high, improvisation parameter moderate, ethical constraints maximum, safety protocols maximum. Acknowledged, the computer replied. Data stepped into the light. The holodeck doors opened onto rain. Seattle's rain was not the violent rain of a tropical planet, nor the crisp, needle-fine precipitation of a cold moon. It fell with patient determination, as if it had time. Data walked down a street he had never visited and knew in detail. Cars passed with a sound designed to be background. People moved with purpose that pretended not to be purpose. A cafe sign glowed invitingly, nervosa. Inside, coffee machines hissed, cups clinked, and the air smelled like roasted beans and human conversations. Frasier Crane sat at a table with a newspaper spread like a theatrical prop. He was alone, his posture carefully casual, as if waiting for admiration to arrive. Across from him, a chair sat empty. Data approached. He had selected clothing from the show's era, a tailored suit, a tie that matched the cafe's muted palette. He had considered adding a raincoat, but concluded that Frasier Crane did not appear to believe in outerwear unless it was expensive enough to be discussed. Good afternoon, Data said. Frasier looked up with the alertness of someone who assumed greetings were for him. Ah, hello. Data extended his hand. I am Commander Data. Frasier blinked once, then stood with practiced charm and took the hand. His grip was firm, his smile calibrated. Frasier Crane. Data noted the slight pause before Crane, as if Frasier were placing his last name on a pedestal and trusting the world not to knock it over. Commander, Frasier repeated. How fascinating. Commander of what, exactly? I am an officer in Starfleet, Data replied. I serve aboard the Federation Starship Enterprise. Frasier's expression held steady. Only his eyebrows moved, the way curtains moved when there was a draft in a supposedly sealed room. Well, he said lightly, then I suppose I should be grateful you're not here to annex my table. Data did not detect hostility. He detected a joke. He responded with the closest approximation he had rehearsed. I have no intention of annexation. Frasier's smile tightened, then loosened into a laugh that was not quite real. Good, because this is my favorite table. A movement behind Data drew Frasier's attention. A man approached with the elegant precision of a surgeon entering an operating room. Niles Crane carried a cup and saucer with the seriousness of a religious offering. He wore a suit that had never met a wrinkle, and his face held the expression of someone who had been forced to breathe the same air as the general public and wished to file a complaint. Frasier, Niles said, then stopped. He looked at Data as if Data were a rare antique placed on the wrong shelf. Frasier gestured. Niles, meet Commander Data. Niles's eyes flicked to the offered hand. He took it with the minimal contact necessary to satisfy etiquette. How do you do? I am functioning within normal parameters, Data replied. Niles froze. Frasier coughed into his fist. He means he's fine. Data looked from one brother to the other. Their micro-expressions differed. Frasier's amusement contained a hint of uncertainty. Niles's fastidious horror fought curiosity. Commander, Niles said carefully, did you say you're in Starfleet? Yes. Niles turned to Frasier in a whisper that was not actually quiet. Is this one of your callers? You know, those men who pretend to be Napoleon and insist everyone address them as Your Majesty? Frasier's eyes glittered. If he is, he's the most well-dressed delusion I've ever seen. Data considered clarifying. He also considered that humans frequently began relationships with each other by accepting a certain amount of nonsense until it proved useful. He chose a middle path. I am aware that my statement may be implausible within your frame of reference, Data said. Nevertheless, it is accurate. Frasier leaned back, appraising him. Well, Commander, implausibility is hardly a crime in Seattle. Tell me, what brings you to Cafe Nervosa? Data found himself experiencing a sensation he had categorized as anticipation. I have studied your recorded conversations, he said. I find them entertaining. Niles's mouth twitched. Entertaining? Yes. Your banter demonstrates rapid associative linkage and frequent ironic reversal. I am attempting to learn humor. Frasier's face softened with the almost parental delight he reserved for being needed. Well, finally, someone who admits it. Niles lifted his cup. And what, precisely, do you wish to learn? Data paused. He had prepared several answers. The most honest one came first. How you tolerate each other, Data said. Silence fell for half a second, the way it did before laughter on the recordings. Then Frasier let out a sound that was close to genuine. Niles's eyes narrowed. We tolerate each other because we are brothers. A biological relationship does not ensure compatibility, Data observed. Frasier pointed at him. Oh, I like him. Niles made a small sound of offense. Of course you do. Data watched them, cataloging. Two men, similar vocabulary, similar posture, similar hunger. Their rivalry was not a knife, it was a fork, polite, sharp, used at the table. Commander Data, Frasier said, tell me, are you in Seattle long? Data assessed the holodeck program's parameters. Time here could be measured in minutes or in story. I am here until my research is complete, he said. Niles lifted his chin. Research, yes? Frasier spread his hands. Well then, consider us at your disposal. Data's internal clock registered a new entry. First successful invitation. He sat. The coffee machine hissed like a contented cat. Rain continued beyond the windows. Somewhere within the program's architecture, a laugh track waited like a net. Niles sipped his espresso and regarded Data as if deciding whether to diagnose him or adopt him. Frasier folded his newspaper with a flourish he seemed to perform even when alone. Now, Frasier said, leaning in, Commander, do you have a preference? Latte? Cappuccino? Perhaps a nice Darjeeling? Data considered the options. He did not need caffeine, but he needed participation. I will have what you are having, Data said. Frasier beamed. Excellent. Niles's eyes flashed. He can't have what you're having, Frasier. You're having your usual, an Ethiopian roast with a hint of... With a hint of condescension, Frasier finished smoothly. Data's head tilted a fraction. Is condescension a flavor? Frasier opened his mouth. Niles closed his. And, for the first time since entering the program, Data felt a subtle tremor in his chest, the beginning of laughter, like a system booting toward a mystery. Chapter 2, The Apartment of Many Rules. If Café Nervosa was where the Crane brothers performed their intellect for strangers, Frasier's apartment was where they performed it for each other. Data learned this within 30 seconds of arriving. Frasier's building rose above the city like a glass sermon. The elevator ride contained small talk delivered with the solemnity of a confession. So, Frasier said, pressing the button with the confidence of a man who trusted elevators to obey him, what line of work did you say you were in again? Starfleet operations, Data replied. Niles glanced at Frasier, then back at Data. And Starfleet is? An exploratory and defensive organization, Data said. It is also a diplomatic service. Frasier's smile did not flicker. How wonderfully comprehensive. The doors opened, Frasier stepped out into his hallway, and Data stepped into an environment so perfectly familiar that his internal sensors registered it as an uncanny feedback loop. He was standing inside a set he had watched hundreds of times. Except the air had weight, the carpet had texture. The faint smell of expensive wood polish existed not as a suggestion but as chemistry. Data's hand brushed the back of a chair as he passed. The fabric was exactly as expected, too delicate for practical use, chosen specifically to announce that practical use was beneath it. Frasier swung his door open as if welcoming the audience to a show. Home, sweet home. Data entered. He did not comment on the view. Frasier waited anyway. When Data did not comment, Frasier cleared his throat. It's a lovely vista, isn't it? Yes, Data said, turning to the window. It appears to have been rendered with high resolution. Frasier's face did a complicated thing that suggested he had not anticipated that exact compliment. Well, thank you. If you find that phrase unappealing, Data added, I can rephrase, the cityscape is aesthetically pleasing. Niles sighed as if he had been forced to watch someone take a sip of wine and say it tasted wet. Martin Crane's voice arrived from the living room before Martin himself did. Frasier, if you're going to bring somebody home, tell them to take their shoes off. Frasier's expression tightened in the way it always did when his father's existence intruded on his preferred narrative. Dad, I have company. Martin emerged in his recliner like a man rising from a fortress. Eddie trotted beside him, ears alert, gaze suspiciously intelligent. Daphne followed with a dish towel over her shoulder, expression bright and welcoming, as if greeting strangers were not a job but a hobby. Niles's posture instantly changed. His spine became an instrument tuned for her attention. Dad, Frasier said, this is Commander Data. Martin looked Data up and down. Commander, huh? Data nodded. Yes, sir. Martin's eyes narrowed. You in the Navy? No, Starfleet, Data replied. Martin shrugged as if the distinction did not matter. Well, you look like you can handle yourself. Sit down. Eddie sniffed at Data's shoes and then sneezed. Data crouched smoothly to Eddie's level. Hello, Eddie. Eddie leaned back as if surprised the strange man knew his name. Then he sniffed Data's face, found no useful information, and barked once, short, authoritative. He likes you, Martin said, sounding genuinely impressed. Niles blinked. He does. Martin nodded. Eddie's got instincts. Data stood. Eddie's olfactory receptors have detected that I do not perspire. Frasier stared. You don't perspire. No, Data said. My body does not require thermoregulatory sweat. Daphne tilted her head. That must be lovely. Niles looked faintly ill. It's unnatural. Thank you, Data replied. Niles's eyes widened. Frasier coughed again. Daphne pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. Martin looked pleased. He's got a sense of humor. Data made a note. Humor, to Martin Crane, includes frankness. Frasier gestured toward the couch. Please sit. Can I offer you something? Sherry? Wine? Sparkling water? Data selected the option that seemed most thematically appropriate. Sherry, if you have it. Niles's eyes flashed with approval. A man of taste. Frasier reached for a bottle on the sideboard, held it up like a trophy, and began to pour into 3 glasses, then paused as if he had just remembered something. Commander Data, he said, I don't suppose you drink? Data considered the definition of drink. I can ingest liquids. They pass through a holding chamber and are later disposed of. Frasier froze mid-pour. Niles set his cup down with exquisite delicacy. Disposed of. Martin chuckled. We all do that, son. Frasier recovered first because Frasier always recovered first. He finished pouring. Well, here's 2, whatever it is you do with sherry. They raised glasses. Data followed the motion precisely. The taste registered as sweet, oxidized, complex. It did not produce intoxication, but it produced information. Niles watched him like a hawk. And? Data swallowed. It contains a pleasing interplay of residual sugars and volatile aromatic compounds. Niles's face softened into reverence. He understands. Frasier's smile returned with renewed vigor. I told you, Niles, we're at his disposal. Martin pointed the remote at the television. So what's this about? You studying my boys like they're some kind of zoo exhibit? Data shifted his attention. Martin's tone was suspicious, but not hostile. Protective, perhaps. I am studying your sons as an example of sibling interaction and comedic structure. Frasier tilted his head. Comedic structure? Yes, Data said. For example, you frequently attempt to maintain control of your environment. However, your father's presence introduces variables that disrupt your control, producing conflict. The conflict is resolved temporarily, but the underlying pattern repeats, creating a reliable cycle. Silence. Daphne's eyes widened. Well, that's eerily accurate. Martin stared at Data. Is he always like this? Niles lifted his chin. No, he's usually worse. Frasier shot Niles a look. I beg your pardon? Niles continued, gesturing with his glass. He's reduced your life to a diagram, Frasier. A diagram. Do you realize what that does to a man? Frasier inhaled. It does nothing to a man who has nothing to hide. Martin snorted into his sherry. That's you out, then. Frasier's jaw flexed. Dad. Data watched the rapid exchange. Their words carried meaning beyond content. Their history spoke through rhythm. It was, he realized, less like argument and more like music. Two instruments playing the same melody in different keys. Niles leaned toward Data with sudden intensity. Commander Data, may I ask, what is your educational background? I possess a wide range of knowledge, Data said. My neural net contains... Oh, for heaven's sake, Frasier interrupted. Niles, do not interrogate him. Niles ignored him. Do you have, for instance, familiarity with Jungian archetypes? Yes, Data said. Carl Jung proposed a collective unconscious containing primordial. Niles's eyes sparkled. And Lacan? Yes. Freud? Yes. Niles's gaze sharpened. Zaz? Yes. Niles turned to Frasier with vindictive satisfaction. He knows Saz. Frasier bristled. I know Saz. You mispronounce Zaz, Niles countered. Data lifted his hand slightly. If you would like, I can provide the Hungarian phonetic approximation. Both brothers turned to him. No, they said in unison. Daphne covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Martin's eyes crinkled. Frasier set his glass down with an expression that suggested he was attempting to remain a gracious host while simultaneously resisting the urge to throw his brother off the balcony. Commander Data, tell me, why us? Why not Shakespeare? Einstein? Any number of more? More respectable subjects? Niles offered. Frasier glared. Data replied honestly. Because you attempt to be exceptional while constantly demonstrating that you are ordinary. The contrast is amusing. Frasier stared as if struck. Niles drew himself up. Ordinary? Martin laughed out loud. Oh, that's good. Frasier's voice dropped. Commander, are you saying we're jokes? Data processed the question. He had come here for humor, but he had not come here to injure. No, he said carefully. You are the mechanism by which humor reveals vulnerability. Frasier blinked, the meaning landing slowly, like a plane that insisted on doing everything with elegance even while approaching the ground. Niles looked briefly thoughtful, then shook it off as if thought itself were too casual. Martin pointed at Data. That's the fanciest insult I've ever heard. Frasier exhaled. All right, fine. We're vulnerable. We're human. We're... Overeducated? Daphne suggested brightly. Overeducated, Frasier agreed. Niles lifted his glass again. To vulnerability. Frasier lifted his. To being human. Martin lifted his. To my boys getting roasted by a robot. Data lifted his glass last. To condescension, he said, the flavor. Frasier laughed despite himself. Niles tried not to. Daphne did not bother trying. Eddie barked once more, as if applauding. Data's internal log recorded another entry. Humor may be contagious. Chapter 3. The Call in Experiment. The next morning, if it was morning, the holodeck sun obeyed narrative more than astronomy. Frasier insisted on giving Data a proper Seattle experience. This, Data discovered, meant taking him to work. KACL smelled like carpet, coffee, and urgency. People moved through hallways with clipboards and headsets, speaking into the air as if the air were employed. Frasier walked with the confidence of a man who believed microphones were extensions of his nervous system. Now, Frasier said, I thought today you could observe the show from the booth. See how the conversation flows. The pacing. The condescension? Data supplied. Frasier winced. The cadence? They passed a receptionist, then a producer, then a man carrying a box of paper who looked at Frasier with mild dread. Frasier nodded at him like a benevolent monarch. Roz Doyle intercepted them outside the studio. Roz had an expression that suggested she had already seen 3 disasters and was on her way to a 4th. She took one look at Data and stopped. Frasier. Roz, Frasier said brightly, as if greeting her could erase whatever she was about to say. Roz's eyes traveled from Data's perfect tie to his unnervingly calm face. Who is this? Commander Data, Frasier said, as if introducing royalty. Roz stared. Commander of what? The Nerd Patrol? Data extended his hand. Hello, I am Commander Data of Starfleet. Roz did not take his hand. And I'm the Queen of Romania. Data lowered his hand politely. Your accent does not suggest Romanian origin. Roz's mouth fell open. Frasier stepped between them, using his body as a conversational firewall. Roz, he's doing research. Roz's gaze sharpened. Research on what? On us, Frasier said. Roz's eyebrows climbed. Great. Do we get paid? Not monetarily, Data said. However, your behaviors may contribute to my understanding of human humor. Roz looked at Frasier as if considering whether to lock him in a supply closet. Is this another one of your projects? Frasier's smile hardened. Roz, please. He's an officer. Roz folded her arms. He looks like a mannequin with a tax attorney's haircut. Data processed. That is a negative assessment. Roz's eyes widened. He's learning. Frasier took a breath. Roz, just let him sit in. No harm. Roz held Frasier's gaze for a long moment, then sighed. Fine. But if he starts talking about probing, I'm calling HR. Inside the studio, Frasier's microphone gleamed in the soft light. The O on air sign sat dark and patient. Frasier sat in his chair with a small, satisfied exhale, as if the chair belonged to him by right of intellect. Data took the seat in the booth behind glass. Roz hovered at the console like a hawk guarding a nest. Niles was already present. Perched on a stool with a cup of coffee he looked personally offended by. Frasier, he said, I assumed you were exaggerating. Niles, Frasier replied through the talkback, I never exaggerate. Roz muttered, That's an exaggeration. Data watched the equipment, the signals, the human choreography. He could see the system's purpose, take private pain, broadcast it, transform it into entertainment and advice, a ritual. Frasier adjusted his headphones. All right, here we go. The O on air sign lit. Frasier's voice changed immediately. It became warmer, deeper, smoother-less, a man speaking than an ideal version of a man speaking. Hello, Seattle, Frasier purred. I'm listening. Data felt a flicker of admiration. The modulation was subtle. It was, he realized, a performance of empathy. The first caller came through. Hi, Dr. Crane, a woman said. I'm dating this guy, and he keeps leaving his socks all over my apartment. Frasier leaned forward, sympathetic. The old sock diaspora. Niles nodded solemnly. Data made a note. Frasier used a metaphor to reduce irritation into humor. Frasier continued, Tell me, have you spoken to him about it? Yes, the caller said, and he says he'll stop, but he doesn't. Frasier nodded slowly, as if the caller could see. Then perhaps the socks are not the problem. Perhaps the socks are a symptom. Roz rolled her eyes affectionately. Frasier looked up toward the booth, forgetting for a moment that Data was behind glass. Commander Data, any thoughts? Roz's head snapped around. Frasier? Data pressed the talk button. Yes, Data said into the studio speaker. His voice carried into the broadcast with startling clarity. Your partner's behavior indicates either low conscientiousness or a desire to test your tolerance boundaries. There was a beat of silence so clean it sounded edited. Frasier blinked. Well, that's one way of putting it. The caller laughed uncertainly. Who is that? Frasier's smile tightened. A guest. Continue, my dear. Data, having been invited, continued. A corrective strategy would be to establish a designated sock receptacle. If compliance remains low, you may consider terminating the relationship. Roz slapped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from laughing. Niles's eyes widened in horror. Terminating the relationship over socks? Data looked at Niles through the glass. It is statistically inefficient to remain with a partner who ignores small agreements, as it predicts greater violations later. Frasier leaned back, voice smooth but strained. Commander, perhaps we should explore the emotional component before we leap to termination, Roz supplied. Frasier shot her a look. The caller, however, sounded thoughtful. Actually, he ignores a lot of things. Frasier recovered instantly, because Frasier always did. There we are, the socks are a symptom. Data made another note. Frasier's technique guide the caller to a conclusion Frasier already holds, while making the caller feel she arrived there independently. The next caller arrived, then the next. By the fourth, Roz was no longer watching Data with suspicion. She was watching him like someone who had just discovered a new tool and was deciding whether it was dangerous or useful. Dr. Crane, a man said, my brother and I got into a fight about who gets to host Thanksgiving this year. Frasier's eyes flashed toward Niles, then away. Ah, brothers. Niles adjusted his cufflinks. A perennial tragedy. Frasier began, Tell me. Data pressed the talk button without being asked. Does your brother attempt to assert dominance through hospitality? Frasier's mouth opened, then closed. Roz's eyes went wide. She looked at Frasier as if to say, Are you hearing this? The caller stammered, Maybe? Data continued, calm as ever. A fair division protocol could be implemented. Alternate years? If either party violates the protocol, reassess the relationship. Niles leaned into his microphone aghast. Commander, do you reassess all relationships like a failed land deal? Data turned toward him. Yes. Frasier's laugh came out strangled. Niles, please. Commander Data, perhaps soften. Roz hit a button. A jingle began to play. And we are going to take a quick break, she said into the mic with the desperate cheer of a woman pulling an emergency brake. The ON air sign dimmed. Roz pushed the talk back. Okay, Frasier, what are you doing? Frasier spread his hands. I'm letting him participate. He's learning. Roz pointed a pen at Data through the glass. He's going to get us sued. Data tilted his head. On what grounds? Roz stared. For telling people to break up over socks? Data considered. It is advice, not an order. Niles pressed a hand to his forehead. He's like a therapist with no bedside manner, Frasier finished. Data corrected. I have no bed. Roz burst out laughing. She turned away so Frasier wouldn't see her. Frasier's eyes narrowed. Commander Data, I'm going to need you to understand a concept. Yes, Data said attentively. Frasier leaned in, earnest now. Here, we don't simply solve problems. We help people feel seen. We let them pay you for having feelings, Roz added. Frasier ignored her. We create space for ambiguity. Data processed. Ambiguity is uncomfortable. Niles lifted his chin. Precisely. That is why we charge for it. Data's gaze moved between the brothers. You both monetize ambiguity? Frasier's indignation flared. It's not monetizing. It's giving people tools, Frasier tried. It's exploitation, Roz said. It is a service, Niles insisted. Data listened, then said, It is also performance. Silence. Frasier's shoulders lowered a fraction, as if a truth he tried not to notice had been spoken in a voice too calm to argue with. Roz cleared her throat. Okay, fine. Commander, here's a compromise. Data looked at her. Yes. Roz pointed at Frasier's chair. You can talk once, one segment, and if you freak out the audience, I'm cutting you off. Frasier's head snapped up. Roz. Roz shrugged. Hey, I'm listening. Niles leaned toward Frasier with sudden fervor. Let him do it. Let the commander try his hand. It will be a disaster, and for once, it won't be my fault. Frasier glared at Niles, then at Data. All right, one segment, A, controlled violation of expectation. Data's internal sensors registered the phrase, You have studied my notes. Frasier's mouth tightened. Yes, well, it's either that or I throw you off the balcony and Dad would never forgive me. Roz hit the button. The ON air sign lit again. Frasier smiled into the mic, voice velvet. And now, Seattle, a special guest in our studio today, a man with a unique perspective on the human condition. Commander Data. Data leaned forward and pressed his talk button. Hello, he said. I am an android. I will attempt to help you. Somewhere in the audio feed, there was a collective intake of breath, the sound of an audience sensing novelty. Roz mouthed, Oh my God! Niles' eyes shone with delighted horror. Frasier's smile held, heroic and doomed. Data continued because he had been given the floor and he respected floors. If you call, Data said, please state your problem precisely. Imprecision increases suffering. Roz's hand hovered over the cutoff button like a prayer. And, to Data's surprise, the phone lines lit up. Chapter 4, The Quarkmaster Paradox. After the broadcast, Frasier insisted on lunch to decompress, which, for Frasier, meant sitting in an expensive restaurant while explaining to Niles why the expensive restaurant was not as expensive as he would have chosen if he were not being practical. Data sat between them with a glass of water he did not need and listened to two men attempt to turn humiliation into elegance. Roz enjoyed herself, Frasier said, arranging his napkin with unnecessary precision. The audience responded. The lines were lit up. Niles lifted his salad fork as if it were a scalpel. Yes, Frasier, because you put an android on the air and told Seattle he would reduce their pain by increasing precision. It's like telling a drowning man you're going to teach him hydrodynamics. Data looked up. Hydrodynamics would be relevant. Frasier pointed at Data. See, that's the problem. You're always technically correct. That is not considered desirable, Data asked. Niles and Frasier answered at once. It depends. Data recorded. Ambiguity persists even in agreement. Niles took a sip of his wine, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Commander Data, what do you do for recreation besides dismantling people's coping mechanisms live on the radio? I have numerous hobbies, Data said. Violin, painting, poetry, Sherlock Holmes simulations. Niles' eyes lit. You simulate Holmes? Frasier's brow furrowed. You do know Holmes wasn't real. Data nodded. Yes, that is why he is safe to simulate. Frasier opened his mouth, then closed it as if realizing the irony was too sharp to touch. Niles set down his glass, suddenly energized. Commander Data, I have an idea. Frasier sighed. Oh, here we go. If you want to learn humor, Niles continued, ignoring him, you must learn subtext. Comedy is often what is not said. Data leaned forward. Yes, I have difficulty with subtext. Frasier's voice warmed with professional interest. We've noticed. Niles pressed on. Tonight, my wine club is meeting. We'll be discussing a vertical tasting of a rather extraordinary Bordeaux, and... A vertical tasting, Frasier repeated, eyes gleaming with skepticism. Is that when you drink while standing on a ladder? Niles sniffed. If you had ever been invited, you would know it's sampling different vintages from the same vineyard. Frasier spread his hands. Well, forgive me. I've been busy helping the common people with their sock receptacles. Niles ignored the jab. The point is, you will be surrounded by people who speak almost entirely in subtext. You will have no choice but to learn. Data considered. If their speech contains little explicit meaning, why speak at all? Frasier smiled. Power, status, fear. Niles nodded, satisfied. Exactly. Data's internal curiosity rose. I would like to attend. Frasier's eyes widened. Wait, what? Niles looked triumphant. Splendid. Frasier, you can come too. Frasier's face shifted into reluctant delight. Well, I suppose I could. Data noted, sibling rivalry often disguises desire for shared experience. That evening, Niles' car delivered them to a room filled with velvet, crystal, and humans wearing expressions of practiced nonchalance. The decor suggested that discomfort had been curated. At the center of the gathering stood a table of bottles, like a ceremonial altar. The club members turned as Niles entered, their faces lighting with recognition, then dimming with judgment. Niles moved through them like a fish through water he believed he owned. Gentlemen, ladies, a pleasure. May I present my brother, Dr. Frasier Crane, and Commander Data. The word commander caused a small ripple. Commander, a man in a patterned tie repeated. Military? Data nodded. Starfleet. The man smiled politely, as one smiled at a child describing an imaginary friend. How interesting. Niles leaned into Data, whispering with a conspiratorial hiss. They're testing you. Don't react. Respond with understated confidence. Data processed. Understated confidence is inefficient. Niles' jaw tightened. Just try. A woman approached, gaze sharp. Niles, who is your guest? Niles' smile became a weapon. Commander Data is a colleague of Frasier's, from out of town. Frasier blinked. A colleague? Niles' foot shifted subtly toward Frasier's shoe in what Data interpreted as a threat. Data chose not to correct the lie immediately. He was experimenting. The woman's eyes drifted over Data. He's very still. Data nodded. I am designed to minimize involuntary movement. Frasier leaned in quickly, voice too bright. He's also very composed. The woman smiled. How refreshing. Data observed her pupils, facial temperature, the slight tightening around her mouth. Subtext he attempted to interpret. You are not refreshed, Data said. The woman's smile faltered. Excuse me? Niles made a strangled sound. Data continued, calm. Your heart rate is elevated, your facial muscles are tense, you appear threatened. The room grew quieter in a way that suggested a collective decision to watch. Frasier's eyes widened in horror. Commander! The woman's cheeks colored. Well, Data tilted his head. Do not be concerned. Your threat assessment is incorrect. I do not intend harm. Niles grabbed Data's elbow gently but firmly. Commander, perhaps the tasting table would interest you. Data allowed himself to be guided, noting, understated confidence may include removing oneself from social combustion. At the table, glasses were arranged in a line. A man with a gravely voice took center position. Tonight, he announced, we are honored to taste the 1982, 1983, 1985, 1989, and 1990 vintages of Chateau. Frasier's eyes glittered. Ah, a classic year. Niles nodded with religious fervor. Data listened to the announcement and ran a quick cross-reference. The vineyard, the weather patterns, the chemical profile typical of each year. He could identify the wines by scent alone. We begin, the man said, with the 82. Glasses were poured. The room fell into murmurs as people sniffed, swirled, and pretended to taste the sound of money. Niles handed Data a glass with the solemnity of a coronation. Now, remember, subtext, do not say exactly what you mean. Data sniffed. Aromatics unfolded like a file opening. It is 1982, Data said. Niles blinked. Yes, we know that. That's what he poured. Data corrected. The bottle is labeled 1982. However, the wine currently in this glass is from the 1983 vintage. Silence spread like spilled sherry. The man at the table stiffened. I assure you. Data held the glass steady. The tannin structure indicates a cooler growing season than 1982. The ester profile suggests higher acidity. The probability that this is 1982 is 2.3%. Frasier stared at Data, then at Niles, as if watching his brother's identity dissolve. Niles whispered, furious and thrilled, How could you possibly know that? Data answered simply, chemistry. The man at the table's face reddened. That's absurd. Roz's earlier words echoed in Data's memory. If he freaked out the audience, she would cut him off. Here, there was no Roz, only status. Data continued, because he did not understand when to stop. If you would like, I can identify the exact percentage of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc in the blend. Someone laughed, a short, delighted sound. Another person leaned forward. Do it. Niles's eyes widened. Please don't. Data inhaled and answered. Approximately 65% Cabernet Sauvignon, 25% Merlot, 10% Cabernet Franc. The malolactic fermentation appears complete. The cork was stored at 70% humidity. The bottle was opened 12 minutes ago. The room erupted, not in outrage, as Niles expected, but in excited chatter. The man at the table looked as if someone had insulted his mother in Latin. Frasier leaned in toward Niles with a grin. Well, this is new. Niles's smile was thin. It's a catastrophe. A club member clapped Data lightly on the shoulder. Who are you? Commander Data, Data replied. No, the member said, laughing. What are you? Data paused. An android. The member's eyes shone. Marvelous. We must have you at every tasting. You can end all this nonsense. Niles's face went pale. Nonsense? Frasier's eyes widened with mischievous delight. Oh, Niles, imagine your club founded on nonsense. Niles hissed, It's not nonsense, it's nuance. Data looked at Niles. Nuance is often a socially acceptable way to conceal uncertainty. Frasier made a delighted sound that was half laugh, half gasp. Oh, Commander, if you keep doing that, I'm going to have to prescribe you to myself. Niles leaned toward Data, voice low, urgent. Commander, please, this is my world. Data observed Niles's tension, the way his hand tightened around the stem of the glass, knuckles pale, the way his smile did not reach his eyes. Subtext. Data tried to respond with understated confidence. I do not wish to damage your world, Data said. However, your world appears to rely on a shared agreement to pretend. Niles's voice went sharp. It relies on appreciation. Frasier leaned in, gentle but amused. It relies on you feeling superior. Niles snapped. Says the man who puts his own voice on the radio like it's Mozart. The club members watched, intrigued. Private rivalry had become public entertainment. Data recognized a familiar pattern, conflict introduced, tension rising. He was, perhaps, inside the cycle he had diagrammed. He tried a new tactic. You are both attempting to assert dominance, Data said evenly, because you are afraid of being ordinary. The room went very quiet. Frasier stared at Data as if Data had slapped him with a silk glove. Niles' face tightened. That is an outrageous. Data added, it is also understandable. Frasier's indignation softened into something like surprise. Niles' breath caught, the way it did when someone accidentally touched a nerve he did not admit existed. Then, somewhere across the room, a bottle slipped from a hand. It fell. Frasier lunged instinctively. Niles lunged instinctively. Data moved like a machine designed to prevent accidents. He caught the bottle an inch above the floor. The room exhaled. Someone applauded. Niles stared at the unbroken bottle in Data's hand. You saved it. Data handed it back gently. Yes. Frasier smiled with the delight of a man watching reality bend in his favor. Well, Niles, it appears your world has been preserved by a robot. Niles' voice rose in indignation. Android. Data looked between them, then said, with careful understatement, both terms are acceptable. The club laughed. Frasier laughed with them. Niles did not, but his lips twitched in betrayal of himself. Data recorded a new entry. Understated confidence may include catching a falling bottle and letting everyone else laugh. Chapter 5, End Program. Data attempted to leave the narrative. After the wine club, Frasier and Niles had insisted on one more drink, purely medicinal, Niles claimed, as if sherry were administered by prescription, and then one more conversation, purely intellectual, Frasier claimed, as if pride were a research grant. Data had humored them both. Now, standing alone in Frasier's apartment while the brothers argued in the kitchen about which glassware counted as festive, Data walked to the familiar wall where the holodeck doors should have been. He raised his hand. Wood paneling met his fingers. Solid, warm. Data frowned, a subtle shift in his expression that humans read as thought. For Data, it was a calculation. He turned slightly and spoke with calm authority. Computer, he said, end program. Nothing happened. The apartment remained. From the kitchen, Frasier's voice floated out. Niles, you can't use the crystal decanter. The last time you used it, Dad thought it was mouthwash. Niles replied, horrified. That was one time, and it was your fault for leaving it near the bathroom. Data took a step closer to the wall and spoke again. Computer end program. Silence. Data's internal systems checked the holodeck interface channel. No response. He attempted a diagnostic request. Computer, report status of holodeck safety protocols. Nothing. Data's gaze moved through the room, tracking angles, potential access points, structural weaknesses. The simulation was constructed with a convincing density. If this was a malfunction, he needed to treat it as one. He did not, however, need to alarm the holographic characters, if they were merely characters. It was possible the holodeck had elevated their behavioral complexity beyond routine. Data's ethical subroutines pulsed in quiet warning. Uncertainty required caution. He turned away from the wall just as Frasier swept into the living room holding a tray like a waiter in his own home. Commander, Frasier said brightly, there you are. I thought you'd vanished. Data chose his words carefully. I attempted to exit. Frasier's eyebrows rose. Exit what? The program, Data said. Frasier blinked. The program. Niles appeared behind Frasier, eyes sharp. Frasier, he's speaking in his Starfleet dialect again. Frasier gave Data a warm, professional smile, the one he used when caller said something he couldn't repeat on air. Commander, perhaps you should sit. Have a sherry. Data declined. I am unable to access the holodeck termination command. Frasier's smile held for half a second longer than necessary. Yes, well, aren't we all? Niles squinted. Holodeck. Frasier set the tray down. All right, let's indulge him. Commander, are you saying you're trapped? Potentially, Data replied. Niles' face tightened. Potentially trapped in whatever this is? Data nodded. Frasier glanced around his apartment as if seeing it for the first time and not liking what he saw. That's ridiculous. You're in my home. Data corrected gently. I am in a holographic simulation of your home. The silence that followed was not comedic. It was the kind of silence humans made when their brains refused to accept the shape of a sentence. Niles broke first. Frasier. Frasier's voice was measured. Yes, Niles. Niles gestured toward Data as if presenting a patient. This man believes he is trapped in a hologram. Frasier inhaled, recovering the familiar warmth of clinical authority. Commander Data, why don't you tell us what makes you think that? Data's head tilted. Because I am Commander Data. I am an android. I am aboard the Enterprise. I initiated this holodeck program. Frasier nodded slowly, as if encouraging a toddler to continue a story about dragons. Niles crossed his arms, eyes narrowed. Classic grandiosity. Data did not understand why stating facts was grandiose, but he recognized the pattern. The brothers were shifting his claims into the category of delusion to make them manageable. It is not delusion, Data said. It is the correct interpretation of current circumstances. Frasier's voice turned soothing. All right, if it helps you, we can explore this together. Data considered. He required assistance, and these men were, in their way, experts at navigating constructed realities. Very well, Data said. Please observe. He walked to the piano. Frasier's eyes lit. Oh, he's going to play. Niles's posture straightened with anticipatory judgment. Data sat and placed his fingers on the keys. He could have performed anything, Rachmaninoff, Mozart, an improvised fugue based on the cadence of Frasier's sighs. Instead, he played a simple melody. It was not from their world. It was a Starfleet signal tone, short, precise, unmistakable to anyone who had ever served aboard a Federation vessel. Frasier's face remained politely blank. Niles's head tilted, curious despite himself. What is that? Data stopped. It is a communication identifier. Frasier smiled. A theme song? Data stood. No. If I were in my actual environment, this tone would trigger a response from the ship's computer. Frasier's smile tightened. And since you're not, it doesn't. Data looked at them. Correct. Niles exhaled in relief, as if this proved the brothers were right and therefore safe. There. You see, you've tested your own delusion. Data corrected. I have tested the holodeck's interface. It is not responding. Frasier leaned forward. Commander, listen to me. Sometimes when people feel powerless, they create elaborate fantasies where they have control. You're a commander. You're an android. You can end the program. It's a very appealing construct. Niles nodded eagerly. Yes, you avoid the messiness of being human by declaring yourself above it. Data listened. Frasier and Niles were doing what they did best, turning terror into theory. It is not appealing, Data said quietly. Being an android is not above messiness. It is different messiness. Frasier blinked. Niles's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Data continued because he had begun to suspect that honest sentences sometimes did what jokes could not. I created this simulation to observe and learn, Data said. However, I now may be unable to leave. I require assistance. Frasier straightened, host instinct warring with skepticism. All right, suppose we accept your premise for a moment. Niles added, carefully, for therapeutic purposes. Frasier nodded. For therapeutic purposes. What would it mean for us? Data weighed the ethics. If they were holograms, their fear was still fear. If they were more than holograms, if the holodeck had, through complexity and improvisation, generated emergent consciousness, then lying to them would be cruelty. He chose honesty with gentleness. It would mean, Data said, that you are patterns of light and force fields. Your memories are composed of narrative. Your world exists because I have asked a computer to render it. Frasier's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his apartment, the couch, the art, the view. Niles whispered, almost involuntarily, That's obscene. Why? Data asked. Niles's voice rose, offended by the very thought. Because it reduces everything to mechanics. Data replied, Everything has mechanics. Frasier's eyes flashed with indignation and fear. Are you saying my life, my choices, my wine club? Niles added sharply. Data met their gaze. I am saying your experiences feel real to you. That may be sufficient. Frasier's breath hitched. His voice went quiet. That's not an answer. Data's head tilted. It is the best answer I have. Niles paced 2 steps and stopped, like a man who wanted to flee but could not find a doorway that did not insult him. If this is a simulation, he said, voice thin, then why would it malfunction? Data answered, Because I modified the improvisation parameters. I increased your autonomy. Frasier stared at him. You gave us autonomy. Data nodded, to make interactions less predictable. Frasier's laugh came out sharp, almost hysterical. Well, congratulations. I'm unpredictable now. I'm, what, sentient? A ghost? Niles snapped. Don't be dramatic. Frasier turned on him. Don't be dramatic. We're, apparently, photons with doctoral degrees. Niles's voice rose to match. If we're photons, then at least we're well-educated photons. Data watched the argument with a strange sensation. They were reacting not to proof, but to possibility. Their identities were so carefully constructed that even a hypothetical threat to the Foundation triggered panic. It was, Data realized, very human. Frasier stopped pacing and looked at Data, voice suddenly small. Why did you come here? Data replied honestly, because I admire your ability to be human in public. Niles scoffed. We're not human in public, we're curated in public. Data nodded. Yes, that is what I admire. Frasier's eyes narrowed. That's insulting. Data considered. It is also envy. Niles's face softened, then hardened again as if softness were a stain. Commander, if you can't end your program, if you're stuck here with us, what happens? Data looked again at the wall where the holodeck doors should be. I do not know, he said. The word landed heavily. Frasier's host instinct rose like a reflex. He walked to the sideboard and poured sherry with hands that trembled only slightly. All right, he said, voice brisk, almost cheerful. Then we do what we always do. Niles looked at him. What's that? Frasier forced a smile. We talk, we overthink, we make a plan, and we drink. Niles lifted his glass, searching for normalcy. To being, he stopped. He could not say real without choking on it. Data took his glass. The liquid was amber and patient. To being, Data offered. Frasier echoed, softer, to being. They drank. Outside the windows, Seattle's rain continued, indifferent to metaphysics. And somewhere behind the walls of the apartment, beneath the program's polished surfaces, Data heard something he had not heard before. A faint, delayed ripple of laughter, as if the holodeck itself had decided this was, after all, a joke. Chapter 6, a proper closing scene. Frasier Crane was not, by nature, good at helplessness. He was, however, excellent at pretending he was not helpless. The morning after the revelation, or the delusion, depending on which brother's dignity currently held the floor, Frasier moved through his apartment with purposeful energy. He made coffee, he straightened cushions that were already straight, he opened the curtains as if sunlight could solve metaphysics. Niles sat at the table with his hands folded, staring into a cup of coffee like it contained his future, and the future was bitter. Data stood near the wall where the holodeck doors should have been, quietly listening to the silence that answered him. Computer, Data said again, end program, nothing. Frasier clapped his hands once, too loudly. All right, that's enough of that. We have a situation. We need a plan. Niles looked up. A plan for what? Escaping your imagination? Frasier ignored him and turned to Data. Commander, you're the engineer here. What do you do when your ship's computer refuses to respond? Data considered. I access a secondary interface. Frasier nodded briskly, pleased to have something practical. Yes, exactly. So where is the secondary interface in this, holodeck? Data looked around, eyes moving over surfaces with a precision that made Frasier feel, briefly, like a poorly arranged bookshelf. In standard Starfleet holodeck architecture, Data said, there is an access panel behind the main set boundary. Frasier gestured at the wall. Well, go to it. Data placed his palm against the wood paneling again and applied incremental pressure, testing for a seam. The wall held. Niles's mouth tightened. How convenient. Data withdrew his hand. It appears the program has locked the boundary. Frasier stared. The program locked the boundary. Data nodded. Yes. Frasier's voice rose. Why would it do that? Data answered carefully. Because it is designed to maintain narrative integrity. Niles blinked. Narrative integrity. Data turned slightly toward them. Your world is structured like a situational comedy. It contains recurring patterns, misunderstandings, escalating social tension, temporary emotional resolution. Frasier's expression flickered between awe-sense and reluctant recognition. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds so... accurate? Niles offered. Frasier glared, then exhaled. Fine. So, what does narrative integrity have to do with the doors? Data's voice remained calm. The program may be waiting for a concluding scene. Niles stared. A concluding scene. Frasier's mouth opened. You mean we have to finish an episode? Data nodded. Niles' laugh was sharp and disbelieving. Oh, wonderful, we're trapped in a farce. Frasier's eyes narrowed with sudden competitiveness. If we're trapped in an episode, then I refuse to be reduced to a punchline. Niles looked at him. You've been reduced to a punchline for 11 years. Frasier snapped. That's not the point. Data listened to their bickering and, for once, did not attempt to stop it. It seemed, perversely, to be part of the mechanism. If we require emotional resolution, Data said, cutting through their argument with clinical calm, then we should identify the primary conflict currently unresolved. Frasier turned toward him, grateful for a task. All right, what is it? Data looked at them. You are both distressed by the possibility that you are not real. Niles' jaw clenched. That's unfair, Data supplied. Niles hesitated, then hissed. Yes. Frasier sat heavily on the couch, suddenly exhausted. What would resolution even look like? Data considered. Acceptance. Frasier's eyes flashed. Acceptance of what? That I'm what did you call us, patterns of light with doctoral degrees? Niles muttered. At least we're educated. Data continued. Acceptance that your experiences are meaningful even if your origins are constructed. Frasier stared at the floor. His voice went quiet. That's very therapeutic, Commander. Data's head tilted. I learned from you. Niles looked up sharply. Suspicion and something warmer mixed together. You learned that from us. Yes, Data said simply. Frasier rubbed his forehead. All right, fine, we accept it. We say, oh well, we're holograms. We toast, we make a joke, doors open, end of episode. Data did not reply immediately. Niles watched him. What is it? Data spoke carefully. I do not believe it is sufficient to state acceptance. The program likely requires genuine emotional shift. Frasier looked at him. And how exactly do you propose we have a genuine emotional shift on command? Data answered, that is what you do professionally. Frasier opened his mouth, then shut it, as if realizing the insult was accurate. Niles rose abruptly and began to pace. This is ridiculous. Even if we accept this absurd premise, why should we help you? Frasier stopped him with a look. Because it's the decent thing to do. Niles scoffed. Decent. Yes, we're decent holograms. Data watched Niles' agitation, the speed of his movement, the slight tremor in his hands, the way he avoided looking at the window. Data spoke softly. Because you are afraid. Niles stopped as if hit. Don't. Data continued, not cruelly, but with the honest focus of someone naming a star. You are afraid that if you are not real, your striving was pointless. Frasier looked up, startled by the precision. Niles' throat moved as he swallowed. His voice came out thin. And you're not? Data hesitated. Then he answered more quietly than before. Yes, I am also afraid. Frasier's eyes softened. Of what? Data looked at his hands, at the faintly too perfect skin that mimicked human texture. That I have mistaken observation for connection. Silence settled over the apartment. Niles sank back into his chair. Oh. Frasier's voice was gentle. Commander, you came here because you enjoy us. Yes, Data said. Frasier's smile flickered. There are worse reasons. Niles added, grudgingly kind. There are certainly worse people to enjoy. Data processed the attempt at comfort. He felt something like warmth, not in his skin, but in his awareness. Then perhaps, Data said, the concluding scene should not be about you accepting unreality. It should be about you choosing each other, choosing meaning. Frasier stared, then let out a slow breath. That's annoyingly poetic. Niles' lips twitched. Don't encourage him. Frasier stood. His host persona returned, not as performance, but as refuge. All right, fine, we're going to do this properly. Niles blinked. Do what properly? Frasier gestured grandly at the apartment, the city view, the bar cart. If we're going to end an episode, we end it like us. Niles' eyes narrowed. With an argument? With a sherry, Frasier corrected, and, apparently, a moral. Data's head tilted. I am willing to participate. Frasier pointed at him. No, you're not participating. You're the guest. You sit. You observe. You learn the most important lesson of being around my family. Data asked, which is? Frasier answered, you will be included whether you want to be or not. Niles huffed. That is unfortunately true. Frasier went to the sideboard and retrieved 3 glasses. Niles rose immediately, offended by the choice. Those are the wrong glasses. Frasier didn't look up. They're glasses, Niles. Niles stepped closer, voice low and intense. If we're concluding the meaning of our existence, the least we can do is use the proper stemware. Data watched them with a new kind of attention. This was their ritual, their control, their comedy. Frasier sighed and swapped the glasses, as if conceding the universe's final demand. He poured sherry, then handed one to Niles, one to Data. They sat. For a moment, the apartment was quiet in a way it rarely was. No callers, no club members, no father shouting from the recliner. Frasier lifted his glass. "All right," he said, voice softer. "If we are what you say we are, patterns, then I propose we do the most stubbornly human thing possible." Niles raised an eyebrow. "Complain?" Frasier smiled faintly. "Care." Niles's expression shifted, defensive. "I care." Frasier looked at him. "You care about being right." Niles's jaw tightened. "And you care about being admired?" Frasier nodded, accepting the jab like a familiar coat. "Yes, and beneath that—" He stopped, searching for the word he hated needing. "We care about not being alone," Niles finished, voice tight. Frasier's eyes met his. Data watched the exchange and felt, for the first time in the simulation, that he was not simply observing a mechanism, he was witnessing a choice. Frasier swallowed. "If we're not real," he said, "then perhaps the only reality we have is what we do for each other in this moment." Niles's voice came out hoarse. "Leave it to you to turn annihilation into a speech." Frasier's smile flickered. "It's my coping mechanism." Niles's lips twitched. "It's your brand." Data made an unusual sound brief, involuntary. Frasier froze. "Was that—" Niles stared. "Did you—" Data paused. He had not intended to vocalize. "I believe," Data said carefully, "that was laughter." Frasier's eyes widened with startled delight. "Oh my God." Niles leaned forward, fascinated. What did it feel like? Data searched for accurate description. "It felt like a system error that I did not wish to correct." Frasier let out a laugh of his own, genuine and bright. "That's the best definition I've ever heard." Niles laughed too quietly, reluctantly, as if laughter were a guilty pleasure. Data's internal sensors registered their voices. Not their words, but the warmth behind them. And then, as if the world had been waiting for precisely that sound, the apartment's far wall shimmered. A line of light appeared where there had been wood. The holodeck doors. Frasier's laughter cut off mid-breath. He stared, stunned. That's it." Niles's face went pale. "So this is goodbye." Data stood slowly. His movements were precise, but his attention was oddly heavy, as if gravity had increased. He looked at the brothers. For the first time, he did not see them primarily as subjects. He saw them as companions in a small, absurd experiment. 3 beings trying to perform humanity for an audience that might not exist. "Yes," Data said. "It appears the program will now end." Frasier rose, attempting his usual flourish and finding only sincerity. "Commander Data." He stopped, suddenly unsure how to address an android who had treated him like a person. Niles stepped forward, throat working. "If you leave, do we?" He could not say, "Die." He could not say, "Stop." Data answered gently. "You will return when the program is reinitiated." Frasier swallowed. "And will you reinitiate it?" Data considered. He thought of the laughter, his own, theirs. He thought of the way their barbs had softened without losing sharpness. "Yes," Data said. "However, I may adjust the parameters." Niles tried for hauteur and missed, landing in honest hope. To what? Data replied, "To include more quiet scenes." Frasier's eyes softened. "You mean less farce?" Data corrected. "Less fear." Frasier nodded once as if accepting a truth he could not polish. "Well, in that case—" He lifted his glass. Niles lifted his. Data lifted his last. "To being," Frasier said. "To choosing," Niles added. Data completed the triad. "To connection." They drank. The holodeck doors waited. Data stepped toward them, then paused. "Frasier Crane," Data said. "Niles Crane." They looked at him. Data searched his database for the correct phrase. He found thousands. He chose none of them. Instead, he said simply, "Thank you." Frasier's smile trembled, then steadied. "Any time, Commander." Niles lifted his chin, but his eyes were wet. "Do try not to fix people's relationships over socks." Data nodded. "I will attempt to increase ambiguity." Frasier laughed softly. "God help us." Data stepped through the doors. Light swallowed the apartment. The rain stopped mid-fall. And the world of Frasier Crane and Niles Crane vanished like a joke completed. In the real holodeck, the lights returned to their default glow. Data stood on the grid, alone. The smell of sherry lingered as a ghost of chemistry. He looked at the closed doors, then at the empty space where Seattle had been. Computer, Data said, report holodeck status. Holodeck 1 is now offline, the computer replied. A minor safety protocol fault was detected and corrected. Data nodded. Understood. He walked out into the corridor, posture as composed as ever. Lieutenant LaForge was waiting outside with his arms crossed, expression half amused, half concerned. You've been in there a long time, Geordi said. Data considered how to summarize a friendship with 2 holograms and a glass of sherry. I was delayed, Data said. Geordi raised an eyebrow. Delayed by what? Data paused, then allowed the smallest hint of something like satisfaction into his voice. Ambiguity, Data said. Geordi stared at him for a beat, then laughed. Okay, now I really want to know what you were doing. Data looked at his friend and felt, again, that small system error he did not wish to correct. Perhaps, Data said, we could watch an episode together. Geordi's grin widened. Now that I'd like to see. Data nodded and walked down the corridor. In his internal log, he recorded one final note. Humor may be a controlled violation of expectation. Friendship may be a controlled acceptance of the uncontrolled.